Good morning. I call to order this regular scheduled meeting of the Lake Havasu City Planning and Zoning Commission for June 5th, 2024. Please rise for the national anthem. I'm sorry, for the Pledge of Allegiance.
You can sing if you want.
I can sing, you can sing if you want. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Ms. Hennigan, please call the roll.
Commissioner Matthew Mitchell. Here. Commissioner Susanna Ballard. Here. Commissioner Joan DeZuro.
Here.
Commissioner Paul Lair.
Here.
Commissioner Tiffany Wilson.
Here.
Commissioner Lonnie Stevenson. Here. Commissioner J.P. Thornton. Here. Commissioner Jim Harris. Vice Chair Gabrielle Medley. Here. Chair David Diaz.
Here. All right, seeing that we need one member to come up, please, Mr. Stevenson, would you please come up to the dais and sign in, please? Let me know when you're signed in. Okay. Mr. Gilbert, correspondence and announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The cases that you all heard in May at your last meeting, those are on the City Council agenda for June 11th, so I have no updates on actions that the Planning Commission have taken in the interim today. And then the second item is we've been looking at appropriate date for scheduling election of officers so that we have everybody here. And we were originally looking at 8/7, but that doesn't work for everybody. So we're looking at 8/21, August 21st. I'll be looking at your calendars and let us know what you think about that. If that's the meeting you're going to miss, be present. We're going to try to get as many people as possible present for that action. So just heads up on that. Let me know. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Right, we will all receive the minutes or any deletions, additions, or corrections. Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Commissioner Wilson. Second by by Vice Chair Medley. Any further discussion? Hearing none, ready to vote.
The motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. All right, this is a public hearing and there is a structured order to this process. City staff will present each item. There will be time for the commission to ask questions of the staff and the applicant will have an opportunity to present their case to the commission. Once that is done, we will open a public hearing to give the community members an opportunity to ask questions or provide input. I ask anyone who wishes to speak limit their trips to the microphone to once per item and keep their comments to no more than 5 minutes. Please stay on point and refrain from discussing subject matter not pertinent to the item being discussed. There will be an opportunity for the public to address the commission later on in the meeting. I'll explain that at that time. After public testimony is taken, I will close the public hearing and bring the item back to the table for the city staff's recommendation, further discussion amongst the commissioners, and eventually a motion to approve or disapprove. Thank you for adhering to this protocol. All right, the first hearing is ID number 244287, a request for a minor general plan amendment revising the future land use map designations for 70, 80, 90, and 100 Inlet Drive, track 2293, amended block 5, lots 1 through 4, approximately 2.5 acres, from low-density residential to high-density residential. Mr. Gilbert, your presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the land use component of the first two hearings on the agenda today. The subject properties are located at 70 to 100, that's 4 lots, Inlet Drive, and comprise approximately 2.5 acres total area. The applicant intends to construct 50 new dwelling units in 22 buildings. The subject properties are shown as low-density residential land use category, which is consistent with part of the surrounding area to the east, but not consistent with the land uses and zoning to the north and south, as well as on the property. The applicant is requesting high-density residential, which would be consistent with the R3 zoning that's already in place. Approving this amendment will clean up a discrepancy between the land use map and the existing zoning that has existed since the general plan was adopted in 2016, as the existing zoning has been in place for at least 10 years prior to that. Staff plans to address the larger issue of these areas being in conflict with zoning all across the city with the upcoming general plan update due in 2026. The zoning on the property and a lot of the surrounding parcels to the north and then up McCulloch on both sides, which incidentally goes up to the hearings that we had on 2778 McCulloch at the last meeting. That's at the other end of that. Is all R3 limited multiple family residential. To the east is existing single family residential zoning and land use. To the west is the City Plaza complex with Fire Station number 1 and the police station on the other side of Inlet Drive in P1 and MUN PD zones. The applicant is requesting to add a PD rezone to the existing R3 zoning to permit a higher unit density, but the underlying land use is required to be amended to be consistent with the zoning. The only request that the applicant's making in relation to both hearings is for a density increase. We'll get to the development plan with the next hearing. Based on the findings, the Development Review Committee recommends approval of this application to City Council to amend the future land use map. Mr. Chairman, does the Commission have any questions?
Yeah, does Commissioners have any questions for staff on this item? Commissioner DeZuro?
I just want to clarify. So what we're looking at this first item is just to clean up the general plan zoning to match what should have been done with the general plan 10 years ago, because this has been in place, you said, for 18 years. Was it just overlooked in the zoning maps that we have?
Correct. The official zoning maps dating back into the 2000s show that property as R3. When the general plan was adopted in 2016, the one that we're currently using, it did not reflect the zoning or represent and match the zoning that was in that whole area at the time.
Okay.
And
just to clean
because a
that
lot
up
of the
and match.
development was already multiple family, it wasn't reasonable to expect that area to suddenly become single family if it's already trending multiple.
With the R3. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I know we went ahead a little bit. We gave a recommendation before we did some other things, but is the applicant present and wish to address the commission? Your choice, yeah. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Paul Targos, the applicant, and last name Targos. And I think the staff did a great job of presenting the current situation, and I can answer any questions you may have.
Commissioners have any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. All right. All right, I'm going to open up to the public. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to address the commission on this item? Anyone? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and now bring it back to staff's recommendation one more time. Mr. Gilbert, your recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on the findings, the Development Review Committee recommends approval of this application to the City Council.
All right, thank you. Any more questions from the commissioners to staff? All right, seeing none, I'm looking for a motion to approve or disapprove.
I'd like to make a motion. I move to recommend that the City Council approve land use action number 24-4287, a minor general plan amendment revising the future land use map designations for 70, 80, 90, and 100 Inlet Drive, tract 2293 amended, block 5, lots 1 through 4, approximately 2.5 acres from low-density residential to high-density residential.
We have a second.
I second.
All right, we have a motion to approve by Commissioner Ballard and a second by Commissioner Zuro. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we're ready to vote.
The motion passes 7-0.
All right, thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is ID number 24-4288, a request to approve a general plan development and plan development rezone for 70, 80, 90, and 100 Inlet Drive, track 2293, amended block 5, lots 1 through 4, containing approximately 2.5 acres, from limited multiple family R3 district to limited multiple family plan development R3-PD district, to allow 50 dwelling units in 22 buildings across the 4 lots. Mr. Gilbert, your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since this is related to the previous hearing, you're going to see a lot of the same maps, but I'll go over them again. This is the rezoning component of the first 2 hearings today. The subject properties are located at 70 through 100 Inlet Drive, consisting of 4 lots, and the combined property totals approximately 2.5 acres. The subject properties are shown as low-density residential land use category, which is not consistent with the overlying R3 zoning already in place and was recommended for approval to the City Council in the previous hearing to change the land use map to reflect high-density residential land use. The zoning on the property is R3, limited multiple family residential, which is not consistent with the underlying land use category, but will be if the previous case recommendation approved the City Council, which is what occurred. And it needs to be approved at the council level as well. Many of the surrounding parcels to the north and south across Acoma are R3 limited multiple family residential. Parcels to the west across Inlet are part of the City Plaza complex containing a fire station and the police station. And to the east is R1 low density residential. The applicant is requesting to add a PD rezone to the existing R3 zoning to permit a higher unit density on the 2 subject properties of 20 units per acre, where the underlying zoning currently only permits a maximum of 10 units per acre. Now, move on to the general development plan. The general development plan that would accompany the PD zoning intends for a total of 50 units in 22 single-story dwelling units across all the lots and meets all current multifamily parking requirements. During design review, all development code requirements, including landscaping and buffering, and that was a key point from the neighborhood meetings, was a wall buffer to the neighborhood to the east. Covered parking, dumpster enclosure design, architectural design, etc., will be reviewed and compliance required prior to approval of the project. All structures are intended by the applicant to be single-story buildings. Public Works has been gathering traffic count information on Acoma separate from this project, and the preliminary numbers show that while traffic signals are not warranted, some form of traffic calming measures will be required. The nature of these measures is not finalized yet, but these will be undertaken regardless if this project is ultimately constructed or not. Additionally, all recommendations from the completed traffic study that are supported by Public Works will be conditional approval at the City Council hearing on this application. And to give some quick detail on what traffic calming measures can include, that can include stop signs, street narrowings, speed modifications, issues of that nature, including traffic signals, of course. So Public Works has stated that that will be required and will be performed regardless what happens here. And that's for Acoma. There's not the same concerns for McCulloch. Mr. Chairman, that completes the bulk of the report. I'll get to recommendations after hearing from the applicant and the public.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions before I open up to the commission. So on the, and I guess you said traffic calming measures are going to be really taken into consideration Acoma more so than McCulloch, correct?
That is correct. Public Works was already examining the issues on Acoma prior to this project being proposed. Okay. And they have their preliminary numbers in from the study already. And these numbers will be used by the applicant as well when they prepare their study. But it was done for the city's purposes for the issues on Acoma, and action will be taken according to the city's assistant engineer.
And do we get any, when we do studies like this, is it strictly input from Lake Havasu Public Works, or do we get input from a outside professional agency ever? Do they ever get input from them also?
The applicant is having an outside agency prepare a full traffic study. The recommendations that come out of that are accepted by Public Works, because some recommendations may not be seen as feasible. But the ones that are accepted by the Public Works Department's engineers will be conditions of approval at the city council level.
Okay. And then I have a question for the applicant when he gets up there. Any questions from, yes, different, Commissioner Wilson?
Repeat how many, you said there was 10 buildings per acre that with the current zoning to going to what? I missed what that number was.
I'm sorry?
How many buildings per acre are they asking for?
20.
Thank you.
Which does not exceed the maximum for our residential zones. The MU district has a cap of 20.
Commissioner Stevenson?
Okay, so just to clarify on the traffic, we're not making anything traffic-wise a condition of possibly approving this zoning. That's going to be done outside of this project through the city, regardless of whether this is approved or disapproved. Is that, just to clarify, that what I heard?
Yes.
Okay. And then you mentioned something about a wall. You're talking about a wall that will buffer the rear of the property with those residential lots on the backside?
That is correct. A wall buffer with a landscape screen.
Okay. And then in regards to the parking, just doing calculations, it appears that the 97 parking places is actually in excess of what would be required for that number of units. Do I have that correct?
It's very close to what's required, but they do meet the standards, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One question.
Okay, Commissioner Ballard?
These 50 units are, is there any indication of the square footage of these units individually?
Not at the present. That aspect is still in flux because we're dealing with a general development plan, which doesn't go into the details of construction yet. But these are likely to be very similar to the units, for example, that are being built on Swanson.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, the applicant would like to address the commission on this. Once again, state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Okay. It's Paul Targos, Targos. So I think the staff again presented the applicant application very well, and I'm here to answer any questions around traffic or walls or drainage.
So the question I have is, so you had a community meeting, and were you present at that meeting?
I was not.
Oh, okay. Did we have any data of how many people attended, what the feedback was?
Staff was present at the first meeting as observers. There was approximately 10 residents from the neighborhood, and Mr. Michael Gordon and one other individual that in his, who was it? Michael's friend.
My representation was Luke Still.
Luke Still, that's correct. I'm sorry. Couldn't remember his name, but Luke Still was the other person that was there.
And the general feedback was just that buffer wall was their main concern, and
the general feedback that we heard was the buffer wall, traffic issues on Acoma, and some concern regarding unit density.
Go ahead, you were going to say something.
And drainage was brought up as well.
Okay, and ADEQ has to get involved in this, correct?
I'm sorry?
ADEQ has to get involved in this?
That's going to be up to Public Works as to what they require for the development of this size.
And then just because people are asking the reason for doubling the density from going from 10 per acre to 20.
Yeah, I would say that the margins on this property from a developed standpoint just don't warrant any fewer units on that property.
And I think the key to remember is that it doesn't go above the art, but 20 is the maximum, which you had mentioned earlier.
Or I said earlier UM, but I meant RM.
RM, right. Okay. Any other questions from thank you. Any other questions to this? The applicant? You have one? Commissioner DeJuro?
I just have a question in looking at the design. I know we're not necessarily looking at the design, but I'm looking at the whole scope of this. Is there any yards, patios? I mean, something for people to do outside of living in a cubicle? Because, I mean, let's face it, these are nice. I'm all for getting places for young people and people starting out in town to have a place to live. So I'm for the project. I'm just trying to understand, is there a quality of life? Is there some place for them to hang out in this community?
Yeah, so it's very similar to the projects just completing on Swanson Avenue to get an idea of what that looks like. So I would say in the units that face the parking lots, those end up having some privacy fencing around the patio areas.
Okay.
And the units along the back that maybe face the screened wall end up having privacy fencing that runs up against that screen wall, so a little larger. But, shrubs and gravel in this kind of environment.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions to the applicant? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, this is a public hearing, so I'm going to open up to the public at this time. Anyone from the public like to address the commission on this item? Anyone? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'm going to bring it back to staff for your recommendation. Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on the findings, the Development Review Committee recommends approval of the application, with such recommendation being forwarded to the City Council with the following conditions. Condition 1, the minor general plan amendment recommended for approval by the Planning Commission as Land Use Action 24-4287 is approved by the City Council. Condition 2, submit the full completed traffic study prior to City Council review of this application. Condition 3, the development of the property shall substantially match the general development plan provided with the request. Condition 4, combine all 4 lots into one parcel through the city process for lot combinations prior to applying for a building permit. Condition 5, building permits design review for compliance with city codes are required prior to development of the property. And condition 6, all comments received from reviewing agencies to be addressed during design review, including all recommended traffic flow improvements required by Public Works and any off-site improvements related to the project. Mr. Chairman, those are the conditions of approval.
Thank you. And I would like to add just one thing before I ask for a motion. So on number 2, submit the full completed traffic study prior to the City Council review of this application. I think we need to be very transparent on that, and what it says, what it doesn't say, who looks at it prior, so we have enough time to absorb it, the community, before it happens. Because that's the main concern I'm hearing is the traffic. So okay, so looking for a motion to approve or disapprove from the commissioners on this item. Commissioner DeZuro.
I on ID 244288, make a request to approve a general development plan and plan development rezone for 70, 80, 90, and 100 Inlet Drive, track 2293, amended, block 5, lots 1 through 4, containing approximately 2.5 acres from limited multifamily R3 district to limited multifamily plan development R3/PD. district to allow 50 dwelling units in 22 buildings across the 4 lots, including the 6 staff recommendations that were outlined.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to second the motion.
All right, so we have a motion to approve by Commissioner DeZuro and a second by Commissioner Ballard. Any further discussion? Good question. Do you have, come back up? Yes, you have an opportunity to, I need to ask you if you agree with those. Can you put those back up, Mr. Gilbert, please?
They are,
They were just a minute ago. So from a traffic study perspective, I know that we've been asked to do a traffic study on both Acoma and on McCullough. And that's it's double the expense of a normal traffic study that we've been asked for to do in other developments. And then we really don't, I don't know the language specifically being the owner and not having done this a whole lot during the application process. But, what are the mitigation requirements that come out of those traffic studies? I need to better understand certainly those once this is all done. Because putting in a light is very expensive, and so I wouldn't be able to proceed if the mitigation is to put in a traffic light or even some major narrowing of roads and stuff like that. Privacy, I think, was brought up with the screened walls. We've been in talks about grading and needing the grading to go in a certain direction against bucking the grade of the property. Basically going so that nothing goes into Acoma, everything goes in the opposite direction. with those kind of changes, that really changes the screened wall effect, like where the cost of the screened wall versus the retaining wall that needs to go. So again, mitigation of the privacy fencing and what would be required. And then I think I addressed the drainage, where now if drainage is a part of the requirement, if that is, a substantial cost to change the grade, to go and buck the grade and go north into some wash when that current property slopes towards a coma. But those were my only just comments. Any more questions for me?
The question I would ask you, are you agreeable to these recommendations? Because the motion is to approve it with these 6 items.
Sure.
So I need to see if you're agreeable with the motion. I mean, not with the staff's recommendation, with these 6 items included onto it.
Yes, as long as they don't include, and I just kind of read through it, a requirement of the mitigation that comes from those to proceed. Is that
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Well, let's have Callie Gary say something. Yeah.
It's okay. I'm sure Chris and I are going to say the same thing. We can't make any promises here at this board. So the decision right now is just to make a recommendation to the city council as far as what comes from the traffic studies or anything else that may be submitted, and whatever recommendations or requirements that may be from other departments in the city, such as Public Works. That will all come in due time. And so they can't make any promises as far as what mitigation measures may be required, but they can make a recommendation to the city council and keep the process moving forward.
Now I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Mr. Gill, would you want to say something?
I did state earlier in my staff report that the numbers that the Public Works has gotten off of Coma do not warrant a traffic signal, but that's the only level that they can state at this point. They don't know what the ultimate answer is going to be on a Coma yet, but it does not warrant a signal.
And I like Ms. Gary's comment that it keeps the ball rolling forward. So, all right. So we have a motion once again by Commissioner Ballard to approve, and Commissioner Zuro to approve, and second by Commissioner Ballard. Any further discussion? Yes, Mr. Stevenson.
Again, I'm just going back to, I had asked earlier about if traffic was going to be a condition of this approval, and now we have it as a condition. So I guess I'm confused. You had said earlier in the presentation that the traffic was going to be done outside of and handled. Are we talking about if the traffic study comes back and there's an impact that he has to provide on his properties?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? All right. We are ready to vote.
The motion passes 7-0.
All right, good luck to you. Hope it works out for you. All right, the next item is ID number 244289, request to amend City Code Section 14-02.03, residential units, tables 2 to 3, 2 to 4, 2 to 5, 2 to 6, 2 to 7, and 2 to 8, and Section 14.04.01, dimensional standards, table 4.01-1, to remove maximum lot coverage percent requirements from residential districts. Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application is requesting to remove lot coverage percentage limits that are necessary, as the city has not historically applied lot coverage percentage requirements to residential developments. Rather, the city has used setbacks as the guarantor of sufficient open space on residential lots. With the citywide increase in land values, the need for accessory dwelling units, elderly population, workforce housing, along with the changes in the macroeconomic climate since the pandemic, have resulted in both developers and homeowners utilizing their property as much as possible. As staff examined the current situation citywide, it became apparent that enforcing this standard today would cause numerous existing residential dwellings in all parts of the city to become legal nonconforming, also known as grandfathered. This can create issues for the property owners, particularly when trying to sell. It would also likely prevent many other properties that are not grandfathered from being able to install RV garages and accessory buildings on their properties. an action that could push lot coverage over the limit in many cases. And that's a very common request we get at the counter at City Hall. These types of residential improvements have been very common in Lake Havasu City and very desirable to pursue for new residents, so implementing enforcement measures at this point will not sit well with the community. Therefore, staff supports the requested amendments. In addition, we just learned recently that a House bill that passed in Phoenix this year is going to require, when it takes effect, cities of 75,000, which are not quite there yet, or higher, to not be able to prohibit single, 2, 3, and 4 family dwellings on single family lots. And once we reach that population threshold, it would apply to us. So all these are factors why the lot coverage percent is maybe something that is very good to address right now, and also allow our residents who want to add RV garages and ADUs, which we currently allow a single ADU in backyards, that they don't have to worry about exceeding 50% lot coverage on an R1 lot, which is actually quite easy to do when you start adding RV garages, ADUs, pool cabanas, that kind of thing, because anything under roof counts against that percent. So we believe that eliminating that and only allowing setbacks to govern the available open space. I want to give an example. So the simplest example possible is if you think of a standard R1 lot, that's 100 by 100, 10,000 square feet. And it has a 20-foot front, 20-foot rear, and 5 feet on either sides. So what you end up with when you do the calculations on that is about 55% lot coverage maximum. So the set minus outbuildings, which have a reduced setback, they can be like rear yard areas. So that would cut into that. So you're not going to get exorbitant, unless it's through a PD, exorbitant developments where you have 80, 90% lot coverage, because setbacks are going to restrict that. And then, of course, the PD can allow a higher density specifically for that project that can ignore those requirements simply through the plan development process. But for standard lots that are not in PD, that would allow reasonably 60, maybe 65% coverage maximum. The big difference between 50 and 65. And that could, in some cases, I've had to tell people that they can't build the garage they want in their backyard because it will put them over 50% coverage. So this would alleviate this issue citywide and get rid of a lot of legal nonconformities that are out there right now. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I have on that. I'll answer any questions.
So just for clarification for the public, can you describe what went down in Phoenix, the new thing that's coming up? You mentioned a new house, number of houses or dwellings on a lot.
It's a House bill that was passed, signed by the governor, that the intent is to, within 1 mile of the city's central business district, to allow higher density development and prohibit cities from using zoning to restrict unit densities. It's an attempt to partially fix the housing issue that's nationwide, really, not just here, and provide more available housing for residents and hopefully bring down costs.
So as a scenario, I'm a mile away from downtown McCulloch, and I have a residential R1 lot. I could build, and it's empty, and I buy it, and I want to build on it. I could build 4 structures on it, 4 living structures on it. 5.
It is only applicable to cities of 75,000 or more.
Once we get to the 75, right?
Yes, that would be the case if it meets the criteria in the House bill. We would not be able to prohibit. Now, we could regulate certain other aspects of it, but we could not prohibit the developer coming and wanting to do that.
Okay.
Chris, would the setback still apply in that instance? They would still have to be building those extra structures inside the setback area?
The bill has a lot of provisions, and I don't want to go into the details of it at this point because we haven't studied it in great detail yet, since it doesn't apply to us yet. At our current growth rate, this could be 10 to 20 years, depending on how quickly new subdivisions appear or do not appear. So we're monitoring it, is the best way to put it.
Thank you. Any other questions from the Commissioner DeZuro?
Chris, I was just wondering, in that regard, we're going to be looking at the new general plan, which will take us into that timeframe, which could possibly reach that. So we are going to, will we have information at that time that we can share with the public as to what that requirements would be or what changes we need to make to some of this to comply with that?
Yes, certainly. When the general plan process starts, which we anticipate to be this fall, that will be a point of discussion and will have to be planned for the future. We don't know what that looks like yet. We'll talk with the consultants that are brought on board for that, and we'll figure out the solution where when we hit 75,000, we don't have to completely redo our general plan and zoning maps.
Mr. Chair, it's also important just to keep in mind that although this bill is going to go into effect and it's for the 75,000 population, it does have a possibility of changing before we ever reach 75,000. So I don't want us to get too excited. We're obviously going to monitor it. We're going to keep it in mind, but this is going to have far-reaching consequences, and so it's going to hit a lot of cities before it hits us, and so hopefully there'll be opportunities to fix some of the pieces of it and clean it up before it impacts Lake Havasu.
Yeah, we'll have some data to look at. Yes, correct. I agree with that. So, any other questions? All right, I'm going to open it up to the public at this time on this item. Anyone from the public like to address the commission on this item? Anyone? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. And I guess I'm going to ask you for your recommendation, although I know what it is, but please give it to us again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go through a bunch of slides to get to recommendations, but these were just the slides that you were calling out in the title. We're just striking maximum lot coverage in all the residential zone sections that you listed. So that was them there. That's all that change does. The maximum lot coverage was 50 to 60% in all those zones. So the recommendation, staff recommends an approval recommendation be forwarded to the City Council for these proposed amendments to the Development Code, removing lot coverage maximum percentages in residential districts.
All right, thank you. All right, looking for a motion and a second. Vice Chair Medley.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep.
I would like to make a motion to approve the land use action number 244289 to the City Council as submitted by staff.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion to approve by Vice Chair Medley and a second by Commissioner Wilson. Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, we are ready to vote.
The motion passes 7-0.
Okay. All right, that was the last public hearing. Now I'm going to do a call to the public. It is an opportunity for the public to address the commission about a topic not on today's agenda. We are unable to respond directly or have a two-way conversation. If you'd like to speak, please approach the podium. Keep your comments to less than 5 minutes and spell your first and last name for the record. Is there any from the public that would like to come up and call to the public? Anybody? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the call to the public. Mr. Gilbert, future meetings, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next regular meeting will be Wednesday, June 19th at 9 a.m. And it's important to point out that's at the police department. And the reason for that is there is a major general plan amendment that's having its first hearing for Bahama Avenue. And the requirements for major general plan amendments require 2 hearings at different locations. So the police department will host the first one while it's still reasonably capable of hosting a meeting, since there's going to be renovation activities going on in earnest after that. And then the second hearing will be at this location here in July. So
Okay, I got you. All right.
Yep, and that's all I have.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further business, the meeting is officially adjourned.